In the heart of Alabama, wrapped in fog and silence, stood a house no one dared to approach after dark. Not because it was haunted, but because it remembered. Every girl born into the Ellison family was loved, raised, and cherished. And every single one disappeared the night she turned 16. No screams, no struggle, just vanished, as if the earth swallowed them whole. Some said the woods took them. Others blamed devils, curses, or the sins of their father. But the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. They say the wind changes near the Ellison house, that it goes quiet, too quiet, like the trees are listening, like the land knows what's coming. Long ago in 1850, a family built their dream home on a patch of cursed ground in Alabama. They had daughters, beautiful, bright daughters, but none of them lived to see 17. Not one. On the night of their 16th birthday, they'd vanish. No footsteps in the dirt, no broken glass, just a cold stillness, and a locked door swinging open by itself. The Ellison family buried no bodies, only birthdays. And those who still live nearby? They don't speak the name Ellison after dark. Welcome to Behind the Genius, where the darkest corners of history are no longer hidden. In this video we uncover a terrifying tale from 1850 Alabama. A mystery so strange, so horrifying that science still refuses to explain it. The macabre story of the Ellison family. Every daughter vanished on her 16th birthday. This is not a legend. It's not a ghost story told around campfires. This was real, documented, buried, and now, unburied. If you're ready to step into a world where every scream is swallowed by the woods, and every birthday could be your last, then keep watching. And don't forget to subscribe to Behind the Genius, because the deeper we dig, the darker it gets. The stories like this haunt you in the best way. If you crave the forgotten, the unexplained, and the terrifying truths history tried to erase, then hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale that dares to go deeper than fear itself. Leave a comment if you've ever heard of a story like this, or if you believe curses can be real. And give this video a like if you're brave enough to keep watching till the end. Because what happens in this story will not let you sleep easy tonight. The road was nothing more than dirt and roots, winding through the pine trees like a snake too tired to move. No birds chirped in this part of Alabama. No crickets sang at night. There was a silence in the woods that felt too heavy, like it had a weight of its own. It was 1850 when Thomas Ellison arrived with his pregnant wife, Catherine, and their 2-year-old daughter, Mary. They came in a rickety wagon pulled by a horse with tired eyes. Behind them, their past life in Georgia was gone, burnt in a barn fire that spared only their lives and a handful of possessions. Ahead of them lay untouched land, offered cheap by a man who refused to say why. They called it Black Hollow. The land was large, 6 acres of pine forest and a clearing in the center just big enough to build a home. Thomas saw it as a blessing. It was quiet, far from towns. No taxes, no neighbors. He ignored the warnings from the man who sold it to him. Nothing grows there, the man had muttered, refusing to make eye contact. And nothing dies proper either. Thomas had laughed. You mean it's fertile? The man didn't answer. They arrived just before sunset. The moment the wagon entered the clearing, the horse stopped walking. It planted its hooves firmly into the dirt and refused to go any farther. No whipping, no shouting, no pulling could move it. Finally, Thomas gave up and let the horse rest at the edge of the trees. That night, they slept on the ground under the stars. The baby kicked in Catherine's belly. Mary curled beside her mother and fell asleep quickly. But Thomas lay awake, staring up at the stars, wondering why the trees made no sound. No wind. No rustling. No life. Just silence. The next morning they began to build. The house went up quickly. Thomas worked from sunup to sundown, chopping trees, nailing boards and clearing brush. Catherine cooked what she could from their supplies and cared for Mary. Within a month, the Ellison home stood tall. A simple 2-story wooden structure with a chimney, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs, and a root cellar dug deep into the ground. But something was wrong with the soil. They tried to grow corn in the back field. It sprouted fast, but the stalks withered by the second week. Potatoes came out black and mushy. Even wildflowers that once grew near the trees started to rot. Catherine blamed the weather. Thomas blamed his lack of farming experience. But neither of them mentioned the truth, that even the grass around the house had started to thin, as if something beneath the earth was drinking it dry. Still they stayed. In October, Catherine gave birth to another daughter. They named her Elizabeth. Mary turned 3 that year. A sweet, curious child with soft brown curls and a quiet voice. She would often talk to herself, but her parents thought it was just a phase. All children have imaginary friends. One day while Catherine was hanging clothes outside, she heard Mary speaking behind the house. Not the soft baby talk she usually used, but full sentences. Adult sentences. "You don't belong here," Mary was saying. Catherine peeked around the corner and saw her daughter standing at the edge of the woods, facing the trees. No one else was there. "Who are you talking to?" Catherine asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Mary didn't turn around. "The lady in the white dress," she whispered. "What lady?" "She's standing in the trees. She says she lives under our house." There was nothing there. Catherine walked slowly to her daughter and picked her up. Mary didn't resist. She just stared into the woods, her eyes unblinking. Things got stranger as the years passed. At night, the family would hear soft knocking sounds coming from the walls, slow and steady, like someone tapping with a single finger. They checked for rats. Nothing. Sometimes the knocking would come from inside the root cellar, even when it was locked from the outside. Mary's imaginary friend became more demanding. She would talk to the lady for hours. Sometimes she'd wake up with dirt under her nails and scratches on her feet, even though her bedroom window was nailed shut. Then came her 16th birthday. On the morning of August 12, 1863, Mary seemed quiet. Too quiet. She didn't want to eat. She didn't smile. She kept glancing toward the woods. That evening the family gathered to celebrate. Catherine baked a small pie. Elizabeth, now 13, gave her sister a handmade ribbon. Thomas lit a single candle. Mary barely spoke. When night fell, the knocking returned, louder than ever. This time it came from under the floorboards. Thomas pried them open. Nothing was there. Just dirt and cold air. At midnight, the clock in the kitchen stopped ticking. Catherine was the first to wake. She had a strange feeling in her chest, like her heart was being squeezed. She ran to Mary's room. Empty. The window was still shut. The door was still locked. But Mary was gone. They searched the woods for days. No footprints. No torn clothes. Not even the smell of her. Dogs brought in from town refused to go near the property. One howled until it collapsed, foaming at the mouth. The sheriff ruled it a disappearance. The townsfolk whispered about witchcraft. Catherine fell into depression. Thomas grew cold and quiet. Elizabeth slept with a knife under her pillow. And the house grew darker. For the next few years no one spoke of Mary. Her name became a ghost in the family, something remembered but never said out loud. Catherine kept her room exactly as it was. The candle from her birthday was still on the table, burnt down to the waxy nub. Elizabeth began drawing strange symbols in her notebook. She said she saw them in dreams. Symbols carved into tree trunks. Symbols etched in frost on her window. She couldn't remember what they meant, only that they felt old. Then one night she found something buried in the root cellar. A wooden box no bigger than a shoebox. Inside was a lock of brown hair tied with ribbon, a silver locket, and a folded letter. The letter had no name. Just one sentence. She comes for what is owed. Catherine wanted to leave. She begged Thomas to pack up and take them back to Georgia. But Thomas refused. He said the land was theirs. That they had nothing left elsewhere. That Mary would return. But deep down he knew the truth. One night, Catherine found him outside at the edge of the trees, speaking under his breath. He was holding a match in one hand and a bundle of sage in the other. He said it was protection. From what, he wouldn't say. Years passed. Elizabeth turned 15. Catherine tried to send her to live with an aunt in Tennessee. But the train ticket never arrived. The telegram she sent was returned unopened. Roads flooded every time they tried to leave. Horses went lame. Wheels broke. Something didn't want them to go. On the eve of Elizabeth's 16th birthday, the air grew colder. The wind howled even when the trees stood still. Inside the house, mirrors cracked without being touched. The kitchen clock stopped again exactly at midnight. When they woke the next morning, Elizabeth was gone. No sign of a struggle. No broken locks. Just the same silence that had swallowed Mary. Catherine screamed until her throat bled. Thomas tore the house apart. He dug holes across the yard. He tore down the wallpaper in her room. Behind it, carved into the wooden wall, was a name. Josephine Blackwell. Who was she? That night, Thomas entered the root cellar alone. He stayed there for hours. When he came back up, he was holding a small leather-bound book. The edges were cracked. The pages were stained. He told Catherine he found it behind a loose brick. He didn't say what was inside. Not yet. But from that moment forward, he never slept again. After Elizabeth vanished, the Ellison home was no longer a house. It was a tomb with a heartbeat. Every room felt colder. Every window looked darker. The silence wasn't just still, it was watching. Catherine stopped speaking for days. She didn't cry, didn't eat, didn't even move unless she had to. She would sit at the dining table with her hands folded, staring into the woods like something might step out of them. Thomas, meanwhile, became obsessed with the book he had found. He told no one where it came from. Catherine guessed it had been buried in the root cellar, hidden behind the bricks. He spent hours each night in the study, reading it by candlelight. The pages were filled with strange symbols, scribbled notes, and drawings that made no sense. But one name kept appearing over and over again: Josephine Blackwell. It was the same name he'd found scratched into the wall behind Elizabeth's wallpaper. Catherine begged him to burn the book. "It doesn't belong to us," she said. "Whatever it is, it's part of this." Thomas shook his head. "This is all that's left. If we want to understand what happened to them, we need to know what came before us." Catherine wanted answers too, but not from a cursed diary. 3 weeks after Elizabeth's disappearance, the sheriff returned with a preacher from Mobile. His name was Reverend Jonas Fletcher. He was a heavy man with a deep voice and tired eyes. He didn't believe in ghosts, but when Catherine told him what had happened, about Mary and now Elizabeth, his face turned pale. "The Blackwell house," he said slowly. "I've heard that name before." "You mean this land?" Thomas asked. Fletcher nodded. "The Blackwell family lived here before the Civil War. Josephine Blackwell had 5 daughters. Every one of them vanished before their 17th birthday." The room went silent. Catherine's mouth fell open. "You mean the same thing happened?" Fletcher hesitated. "People said it was disease, or that they ran off. But my grandfather was a doctor. He told me he saw the youngest girl one night in town. Said she looked pale, like death had touched her. She was walking barefoot down the road, covered in mud. When he followed her, she disappeared into the woods. They never saw her again." Catherine gripped the edge of the table. "It's not just us. It's the land. The house. It's this place." Thomas stood up. "We need to know everything." Fletcher agreed to perform a blessing on the house. The next morning he arrived with holy water, candles, and a Bible that looked older than he was. Catherine followed him from room to room as he prayed, splashed water on the walls, and recited scripture in a trembling voice. Everything seemed fine, until he stepped into the root cellar. As he began his prayer, the candle in his hand flickered wildly. Then it went out. The room grew ice cold. Fletcher gasped and dropped the candle. From the dark corners of the cellar came a sound, a slow, scraping whisper. He stumbled backward. "There's something down there," he whispered. "Something buried." They tried to help him upstairs, but his legs gave out. His lips turned blue. Within an hour he was dead. The coroner said it was a heart attack. But Catherine saw the truth. She found Fletcher's Bible on the cellar steps, torn down the middle, its pages ripped like claws had raked through it. After that day, no more men of God would come near the Ellison house. Word spread through the town of Harrowsville. Locals began calling the property the Devil's Acre. The general store refused to sell them supplies. Children crossed the street when they saw Catherine in town. Even the sheriff stopped answering their letters. But the strangest part was this: no one seemed surprised. It was as if they'd known something was wrong with the Ellison land all along, and had simply waited for it to happen again. One night, unable to sleep, Catherine wandered into the study and found Thomas reading the book again. Only this time he wasn't just reading. He was copying the symbols onto scraps of paper, lining them up, studying the patterns. "What are you doing?" she asked. Thomas didn't look up. "There's a cycle," he whispered. "Every 16 years. Always daughters. Always this land." Josephine didn't just lose her girls. She gave them. Catherine stared at him. "Gave them to what?" Thomas flipped the book open to a drawing. It showed a circle of trees, a girl standing in the center with her arms raised. Behind her, a shadow with eyes like burning coals. "She called it the Watcher in the Pines," Thomas said. "She believed if she offered something pure, the land would give something back. Crops, rain, safety." Catherine backed away. "You're saying she sacrificed her children?" "I'm saying this land asks for daughters," Thomas whispered. "And if it doesn't get them, it takes them." That night, Catherine packed a bag and tried to leave. She saddled the horse, took the last of their money, and walked into Mary's old room. But as she reached for the door, she stopped. The room was breathing. The air pulsed softly. The candle she held flickered sideways as if pulled towards something. She opened the door. Mary's bed was still neatly made. Her birthday candle still sat on the table. But now there were footprints on the floor. Small, bare, leading from the bed to the wall. She followed them. They stopped at the mirror. And in the glass, for just one moment, Catherine saw her. Mary. Pale. Wide-eyed. Mouth sewn shut. Behind her stood something tall. Catherine screamed and fell backward. When Thomas ran in, the footprints were gone. The mirror was empty. But Catherine wouldn't stop crying. She begged him to leave with her, to burn the book, to take whatever was left and run. But Thomas said one thing, one sentence that chilled her deeper than anything the forest ever had. She's not gone. None of them are. The land just holds them. The days blurred. Thomas stopped sleeping. Catherine grew sick. Her body thinned. Her skin turned gray. The house became colder even in summer. The wallpaper began to peel. Shadows moved when no one was near. And the whispers came at first soft, then louder. Always from the walls. Always saying the same thing. One more. One more. It was then that Catherine remembered. There was still one daughter left. Ruth. She had been just a baby when Elizabeth vanished. Quiet. Often forgotten. Always in the corner, watching with big eyes. Ruth didn't speak much, but she listened. And as she grew older, she began to draw. Strange things. She drew the cellar. The trees. The shadow with coal eyes. She drew the names of her sisters on the walls of her room, even though no one had spoken them aloud in years. And one day she drew herself, standing in a ring of fire. Catherine wept when she saw it. We have to stop this, she told Thomas. We have to end it before it takes her too. But Thomas only looked at Ruth and said, she's different. How? She's listening. Catherine couldn't sleep. She began having dreams, of Ruth standing in the woods, eyes black and bleeding. Of Mary and Elizabeth whispering from inside the walls. Of Josephine Blackwell smiling from the root cellar, her hands soaked in blood. She started locking Ruth in her room at night. It didn't matter. Every morning Ruth's door was open. Every night the knocking returned. The same pattern. 6 slow taps. Pause. Then 16 fast. Over. And over. And over. Catherine tried to leave again. This time she made it to the train station. But as the train approached, she saw Ruth standing on the tracks. Just standing. No fear. No sound. The train never stopped. But when it passed, Ruth was gone. And yet somehow, she was back home before Catherine. Waiting. Smiling. Thomas believed now that Ruth was chosen. She's the last piece, he said. The final daughter. The land will rest after her. Catherine slapped him. You're insane. We are not giving her to whatever this is. But it didn't matter what they believed. Ruth's 16th birthday was only weeks away, and the house was getting hungry again. It was a storm that brought the truth to the surface. One evening, as thick gray clouds rolled across the Alabama sky, thunder shook the windows of the Ellison home. Rain poured so hard it sounded like nails falling from the sky. Trees bent under the weight of the wind. The roof groaned. The fireplace hissed as water slid down the chimney. Thomas sat in the study, staring into the flames, the cursed book still on his lap. Catherine was in her room, curled under blankets, praying, though it had been years since she believed anyone was listening. Ruth was in the attic, silent as always, drawing with charcoal. Suddenly, lightning cracked the sky. A loud snap followed. Then, darkness. The house went completely still. When Thomas lit a candle and opened the cellar door to check the fuse box, he noticed something strange. The wall near the bottom steps had split open. Not just cracked, but peeled back like something had torn into it. Behind the boards, buried deep into the dirt wall, was a second book. Much older. Wrapped in red cloth and sealed with twine that crumbled at his touch. Thomas brought the book upstairs with shaking hands. The cover was blackened leather. There was no title. Inside, the handwriting was small, shaky, and brown with age. Some pages were stained with something darker, something that looked like dried blood. He read the first page aloud. This is the record of what must be done. Of what I have seen. Of what I have given. Josephine Blackwell, 1812. Catherine, still pale from the fever that had taken hold of her in recent days, sat up. Is that hers? She asked. Thomas nodded. It's her diary. He read on. Josephine Blackwell had lived on the land long before the Ellisons. Her family was one of the first to settle that part of Alabama. They were poor, alone, and desperate. Her husband had died in a fire. Her crops had failed 3 years in a row. Disease had taken her cattle. And each winter the ground froze harder than the last. She had 5 daughters. No sons. In one entry Josephine wrote, The land does not forgive. It does not forget. I have begged. I have starved. I have buried 3 children already. I will not bury more. Not from hunger. Not from rot. There must be another way. Then came a turning point. Josephine began writing about the woods. About a place deep within the pines where the trees bent inward. Where animals refused to go. Where shadows stayed too long. She called it the Circle of the Hollow Root. It was there she first heard the voice. Not with her ears, she said, but in her dreams. He is not a man and not a god, she wrote. He watches. He waits. He listens. And when called, he answers. At first she thought it was madness. But then, her crops returned. A spring bloomed in the field. Rain fell gently for weeks. Wild deer walked near her home without fear. She took it as a sign. So she returned to the circle with her daughters. The next pages were written in haste, with uneven lines and shaking hands. He told me what he wanted. He said, one must be given so the others may live. I said no. He said nothing. But the next morning Abigail, my youngest, was gone. I heard her humming in the trees. But I could not find her. Josephine fell into grief. But soon after, her family's fortune improved again. A neighbor gifted them livestock. Her eldest daughter recovered from illness. The land grew fertile. Then the dreams returned. And the voice said, one more. Catherine pressed her hands over her mouth as Thomas continued to read. She whispered, it's the same voice, the same message we've been hearing. Thomas nodded grimly. Josephine's diary grew darker from that point forward. Her daughters began to change, speaking to people who weren't there, drawing the same symbols Ruth had started drawing. They walked in circles. They buried dolls in the ground. They carved spirals into their bedroom walls. The land marks them before it takes them, Josephine wrote. There is no stopping it, only choosing when. She made a choice. One daughter each year. On her 16th birthday. And every time she gave one, her land thrived. Her house stayed warm in the winter. Her animals stayed healthy. The voice stayed quiet. Until she stopped. On the year she refused to give her fifth and final daughter, everything collapsed. Crops rotted overnight. Her home filled with flies. Water turned red in the well. Her cattle screamed in the middle of the night and died with their eyes wide open. And her daughter, her final daughter, was dragged from her bed. Josephine found her body days later in the woods, still humming. The final entry in the diary was short. The land is not cursed. It is hungry. And it remembers those who break the promise. After Thomas read the last page, neither of them spoke for a long time. The wind outside had died down, but the silence inside the house was worse than any storm. Catherine finally asked, why didn't anyone stop her? Because they were afraid, Thomas said. And because the land gave her what they needed. Catherine stood up. Her voice shook. We have to destroy that book. We have to burn the whole house down. We should have done it the moment Mary disappeared. Thomas didn't respond. He was staring at Ruth's drawings again. Spirals, circles, black shapes with burning eyes. The same patterns Josephine's daughters had drawn. And then he whispered, she's next. That night, Catherine had a nightmare. She was in the root cellar, but it was deeper than before, endless like a tunnel beneath the earth. The walls were wet. She could hear humming in the dark. When she turned around, she saw all her daughters, Mary, Elizabeth, and Ruth, standing in a circle, their faces pale and stitched at the mouth. Behind them stood Josephine Blackwell. And Josephine said, one more, or all will be taken. Catherine awoke screaming. Her throat was dry. The walls were wet. She rushed to Ruth's room. Empty. The window was open. Dirt on the floor. Black feathers on the pillow. She screamed for Thomas. He ran out into the woods barefoot, yelling Ruth's name. Catherine ran in the opposite direction. And in the middle of the trees, in a perfectly shaped circle where the grass no longer grew, Ruth was standing. Eyes closed. Arms lifted. Humming. When they reached her, she collapsed into Thomas's arms. She didn't remember anything. But on her arm, just above the elbow, was a strange mark, 3 lines crossed by 1. The same symbol from the diary. The same one carved into the trees. Ruth became quiet after that. Too quiet. Her eyes always looked far away as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. She spoke less. Slept less. Drew more. Catherine stopped letting her out of sight. But at night, Ruth still disappeared. One night, Thomas followed her. He watched as she walked barefoot into the woods, stepping over roots without tripping, moving through trees without fear. She stopped at the circle of the hollow root and stood still. And then, Thomas saw something move behind her. Something tall. Thin. Black. It didn't speak. It didn't touch her. It just stood there. Watching. Thomas backed away slowly. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't tell Catherine what he saw. He just said, "She's not like the others. She's closer to it." They began marking the days on the wall. Ruth's 16th birthday was only 3 weeks away. Catherine no longer left the house. She nailed every window shut. She placed salt across the doorways. She burned sage. She begged. But nothing stopped the whispers. Nothing stopped the dreams. Nothing stopped the house from watching. In the final week, Ruth began carving symbols into her floor with a piece of glass. Catherine tried to stop her. Ruth simply looked up and said, "It told me how to keep the others safe." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "I'm the last one," Ruth said. "After me, no more will be needed." Thomas stood behind them, clutching the diary. He said, "It ends with her." But Catherine wasn't sure if that meant Ruth would survive, or if the land would finally be full. The Ellison house no longer belonged to the living. It creaked even when the wind didn't blow. It sighed at night like it was breathing through the cracks in its own bones. The wood swelled and groaned without reason. And worst of all, the walls had started whispering Ruth's name. Always in the dark. Always after midnight. Always in the same broken, rasping voice. "Ruth? Ruth? Ruth?" Thomas and Catherine no longer argued about what was happening. There was no more denial. The land was cursed. The bloodline was marked. And their daughter, their last daughter, was slipping away. Ruth changed as the days crept closer to her 16th birthday. It wasn't just her drawings anymore. It was the way she walked, slow and quiet as if she didn't want the floorboards to notice. It was the way she stared into mirrors too long. Or how her eyes would sometimes move before her head did, like she saw things others couldn't. She had stopped asking questions. She stopped calling her parents Mama and Papa. She only called them by name now. Sometimes, Catherine would wake in the middle of the night and find Ruth standing at her doorway, silently watching. When asked what she was doing, Ruth would say, "She told me to check." "Who?" Catherine asked once, her voice shaking. Ruth's face remained blank. "The girl with the stitched mouth." Thomas tried to fight it. He buried the diary in the woods. He burned the old symbols Ruth had drawn. He scattered salt across every window. He even carved crosses into the doors with a hot knife. But every morning the symbols were back, drawn again in ash or dirt or blood. Sometimes even carved into the walls. And Ruth's door? It never stayed closed. One afternoon, Catherine took Ruth into town, determined to find help. She knocked on the church doors, begged the preacher, pleaded with strangers. But no one would listen. No one wanted to get involved with the Ellison family. They were cursed, everyone whispered. The kind of cursed you don't touch because it might follow you home. Catherine cried in the street, holding Ruth's hand tightly. But Ruth only stared up at the church bell. She smiled and said, "They'll all hear it soon." That night Thomas had a dream. He stood in the root cellar, holding a lantern. But the stairs had vanished. The walls were wet and breathing. A soft humming came from the dirt floor. He knelt down and dug with his bare hands. He uncovered a bone. Then another. Then a full skeleton, small and curled like a sleeping child. Then another. And another. All with stitches in their mouths. Suddenly the lantern went out. And from the blackness a voice said, "One more. And no more." When he woke up he was holding dirt in his hands. The smell of rot was in his nose. And somewhere in the house, someone was humming. He followed the sound. It led him to Ruth's room. She was asleep in her bed. But the humming was still coming, from her mouth. Soft, quiet, constant. Like a lullaby. He leaned closer. And that's when he saw it. Carved into the wood under her bed, written in a looping childlike hand were the names. Mary, Elizabeth, Ruth. And one more name below them. Josephine. Catherine decided to send Ruth away. Anywhere. Even if the roads were cursed. Even if they had to walk through the forest barefoot. She packed a bag and waited for sunrise. But at dawn Ruth was gone. Again. They found her standing in the woods. In the same circle. Only this time, she wasn't alone. 6 shadowy figures stood around her. They weren't fully visible, just outlines. Faint. Flickering. But real. Thomas and Catherine watched, frozen with fear, as Ruth lifted her hands. The shadows moved forward. Slowly. Silently. Thomas stepped forward, calling her name. The shadows vanished. Ruth turned around, her eyes empty. She didn't speak. Catherine ran to her and held her tight. Ruth whispered, "I saw them. I saw all of them. They want me to come home." "This is your home," Catherine cried. Ruth shook her head. "No. This is the feeding ground." The next day the house began to die. The walls oozed dark liquid. Flies filled the chimney. The windows stayed fogged even when open. Doors slammed without warning. The attic filled with dead birds. And worst of all, clock stopped working. Time had begun to twist. Thomas would enter the kitchen and come out 2 hours later, even though he only made tea. Catherine saw her own reflection blink before she did. Ruth sat in her room, writing in a book that hadn't been there before. The diary. The one they buried. It had come back. Covered in fresh mud. Pages filled in Ruth's handwriting. Only she didn't remember writing them. Thomas confronted her. He yelled. He begged. He asked who was speaking to her. Ruth finally looked at him and whispered, "You are." "What? You started this, didn't you?" she asked. "All those years ago. You promised something when we were starving. When we first moved here." Thomas turned pale. He had never told anyone, not even Catherine. He had made a wish. A foolish, desperate prayer on the first night they arrived. He had stood in the woods and begged for protection. For food. For safety. And something had listened. Now it wanted what was owed. Ruth began preparing for her birthday in strange ways. She refused cake. Refused gifts. She only asked for one thing, to be left alone in the root cellar at midnight. Catherine refused. Thomas was unsure. "She says it'll end if we let her do this," he told his wife. "She says she knows how to stop it." "She's a child." Catherine screamed. "She doesn't know anything. It's using her. Just like it used Josephine." "She's not like the others," Thomas whispered again. "She's been chosen differently." Catherine stared at him, her eyes wide. "What did you promise it?" she asked slowly. Thomas said nothing. But that night he placed a chair outside Ruth's door. He would not let her leave. At least that's what he thought. At midnight the door creaked open behind him. He turned around. Ruth was gone. They searched the house. The woods. The cellar. Nothing. Until they noticed the well behind the house, sealed since the year Mary vanished, was uncovered. Catherine walked toward it, heart pounding. Inside at the bottom was the sound of humming. But it wasn't Ruth's voice. It was many voices. Singing. And then a whisper. "She's almost ready." At sunrise Ruth returned. Wet. Covered in mud. Eyes wide and smiling. "I saw the roots," she said. "What roots?" Thomas asked. "The ones under the house. The ones it feeds through. The ones made of bone." Catherine pulled her into her arms. But Ruth didn't hug her back. She only said, "It'll end soon. I promise." They didn't know what she meant until the night before her birthday. She came to them calmly and said, "You'll need to lock every door. Light every candle. And don't come into the cellar, no matter what you hear." Catherine refused. "We are not letting you go." Ruth smiled. "You won't have a choice." That night the air inside the house changed. It grew heavy. Thick. Hard to breathe. The walls thumped slowly, like a giant heartbeat. Ruth disappeared at midnight. The cellar door swung open on its own. And the humming returned. Louder than ever. More voices than ever. From the cellar. From the attic. From the very ground. Thomas and Catherine sat on the floor holding each other, too terrified to move. The candles blew out one by one. The mirrors cracked. The clock struck 16 times, then shattered. And then, screaming. Not Ruth's. The house. The house screamed. Then silence. When morning came, the cellar door was still open. Ruth was gone. And carved into the stone floor was a message. The roots have been fed. The land will sleep. The Ellison farmhouse stood quiet now. Too quiet. After Ruth vanished, Thomas and Catherine were never the same. They moved like ghosts through their own home. They didn't speak much. They didn't cry. Crying meant accepting. Accepting meant Ruth was gone forever. And neither of them were ready for that. But the house had changed. It was no longer alive. The walls had stopped groaning. The shadows had stopped shifting. The mirrors stopped reflecting anything unusual. Even the whispering voices were gone. The silence should have been comforting. It wasn't. It felt like the calm after a storm, before the next one hits. One fog-heavy morning, Thomas lit the fireplace in the parlor for the first time in weeks. As the smoke curled upward, something strange happened. It didn't go straight up the chimney. It moved sideways first, curving unnaturally, dancing along the wall, then spiraling toward the ceiling like it was alive. Catherine saw it too. "It's just a draft," Thomas said quickly. But that same night the smoke came again, on its own. No fire. No wood. No match lit. Yet thin ribbons of gray smoke drifted from the corners of the room, from under the bed, from behind locked doors. It gathered near the windows, then vanished. And sometimes, it formed a shape. A tall man. Long coat. White hat. No face. Only smoke. And the smell of burnt hair. The next morning, Thomas walked outside and found hoof prints in the soft dirt leading from the woods to their front door. But there was no sign of a horse. No broken branches. No manure. Just perfect, heavy hoof prints. Like something massive had walked straight to their home, and stopped. Then Catherine found something worse. Inside the kitchen, on the window, written in soot. "Where is the last one?" At first they assumed it meant Ruth. But Ruth was the last. Wasn't she? Thomas remembered the message carved into the cellar floor. The roots have been fed. The land will sleep. If the land had been fed, why did the house still feel watched? That night the smoke came again. This time it filled the parlor. Thick and choking. When Thomas tried to open the door, it slammed shut. When he tried to break a window, the glass turned black. And through the smoke, that man-shaped figure appeared again. He didn't walk. He floated. He had no eyes. No mouth. No flesh. Just a tall hat and long arms that reached almost to the ground. Thomas backed away. The figure lifted a hand, and pointed to the floor. Beneath the old rug. Thomas pulled it back. There was something carved into the floorboards. "She was never yours." Thomas screamed. The smoke vanished. When Catherine came running, he showed her the message. But it was gone. Just bare wood. No carvings. No soot. Just like before. The house was toying with them again. For the first time in years, Thomas left the house. He walked to the edge of the woods and screamed into the trees. "What do you want from us?" The trees didn't move. But a wind passed through. Cold. Sure. In it he heard the voice again. "Payment is not complete." That night they stayed up with every candle lit. Salt along the doors. Crosses in every room. Catherine clutched her Bible. Thomas held his father's hunting rifle, though it felt pointless against ghosts. At midnight the front door swung open on its own. Smoke poured in. The man stood there again. But this time they could see something beneath the smoke. A skull. Its mouth stitched shut. Its eye sockets empty and glowing red. Catherine screamed. The Bible dropped from her hands. The man pointed again. But now, to Catherine. The voice came from behind them, Ruth's voice. "Don't listen to him." They turned. Ruth stood there. Soaked. Dirty. Eyes pale blue and glassy. Her feet were bare, covered in mud. "I thought you were," Catherine began. "I'm not alive," Ruth said quietly. "But I'm not dead either." The man in smoke vanished. Ruth walked toward them. "I saw everything. All of them. Mary, Elizabeth, Clara, Josephine. I saw what he made them do. I saw what he promised." "Who is he?" Thomas whispered. Ruth looked down. "The one who lives under the house." Thomas felt the floor shudder beneath them. Ruth nodded toward the fireplace. "Go inside." "What?" "There's a door behind the firewood. It was sealed shut a long time ago. But it's open now." Thomas and Catherine hesitated, then moved toward the hearth. Sure enough, behind the ashes and broken bricks, there was a hidden doorway, small and made of rusted iron. It hadn't been opened in decades. Catherine stared at Ruth. "You want us to go down there?" Ruth nodded. "You need to see what he did." Thomas opened the door. Cold air rushed out, wet and foul. He lit a lantern and crawled through the opening. The tunnel sloped down. And down. And down. Catherine followed. Behind them, Ruth remained at the entrance. "I'll be waiting." The tunnel opened into a stone room. Inside were coffins. 12 of them. Each with a name. Mary. Elizabeth. Claire. Josephine. Anna. Ruth. And 6 others, names they didn't recognize. Women. Girls. Some still children. Thomas touched the side of Ruth's coffin. The wood was warm. And inside he heard breathing. Not one person's breathing. Many. A chorus of lungs filling slowly. Alive, but trapped. Catherine fell to her knees. "We thought we buried them." "You did," said Ruth's voice from above. "But he dug them up." Thomas looked up. "Who is he?" Ruth answered softly. "He was a doctor once. A man who feared death. He came to Alabama running from the war. He bought this land. And he built this house above his patients." Thomas swallowed. "His patients." "Girls," Ruth said. "He thought young blood kept him alive. But it wasn't enough. He turned to something else. Something buried deep in the roots." Catherine whispered, "A demon?" Ruth didn't respond. But the silence said yes. Suddenly the smoke filled the chamber. The man appeared again, larger this time. Coffins rattled. The walls wept black liquid. Ruth stepped into the room now, floating. "She's not yours," she said to the man. "She never was." She pointed at Catherine. The man shrieked. The lantern exploded. Darkness. When they woke, they were lying in their own bed. No smoke. No Ruth. No coffins. Just morning light. Had it been a dream? Then they noticed something new. A small letter on the kitchen table. It had no stamp. No seal. Just a name written in ink. Josephine Ellison. Inside were pages. Drawings. Descriptions. Records of experiments. Diagrams of rituals. All in the same handwriting. Catherine flipped to the final page. One sentence. "To escape the roots, you must plant a new tree." The letter sat on the table for 3 days. Neither Thomas nor Catherine could bring themselves to touch it again. The final words haunted them. "To escape the roots, you must plant a new tree." What did that mean? Was it a warning? A threat? Or a way out? Catherine began digging through the old family Bible again. She flipped through the handwritten notes her grandmother left behind, some barely readable. Among the names of births and deaths was a page with scribbled words. "It grows where it feeds. The tree drinks from the girls. The soil remembers. The roots twist." There, drawn in the corner, was a crooked tree. Black, leafless. Its branches shaped like screaming hands. Catherine froze. She had seen that tree before. In her dreams. That night the dreams returned. Catherine stood in the middle of a foggy field. The soil was black and sticky, pulling at her shoes. In front of her stood a tree, twisted, hollow, with bark that bled. At the base were 12 dolls, each buried to the neck. Their eyes were open, watching her. The wind whispered her name. Then, from the base of the tree, something crawled out. Not a person. Not anymore. It was the man of smoke, but melted. His bones snapped and stretched. His face twisted into 5 mouths. He had roots for legs, burrowing deep into the earth. He screeched and reached for her. Catherine screamed and woke. Thomas was already awake. He'd been outside, digging. "What are you doing?" she asked. He looked over his shoulder, dirt on his face. "I found it." "What?" He pointed to the back of the property behind the barn. There in the ground was a tree stump, burned and gnarled just like the one from her dream. "I remember now," he whispered. "When I was a boy, before the house was finished, there was a tree here. The builders refused to cut it. Said it bled." Catherine's skin crawled. Thomas continued, "One night it burned. No lightning. No fire nearby. Just flames. They buried the roots instead of digging them out. Built the house right over them." He paused. "What if we're living on top of it?" They spent the day clearing the dirt. And what they found beneath the stump made their blood run cold. Bones. Dozens of them. Child-sized. Some wrapped in cloth. Some marked with old iron tags. And under them, a tunnel, leading deeper than any they had seen before. Thomas lit a torch. "I'm going in." "No," Catherine said. "We go together." The tunnel was narrow, damp, and smelled like rot. As they climbed downward, they saw carvings on the walls. Not words. Faces. Hundreds of them. All carved by hand. All of them screaming. Then, light ahead. A dim reddish glow. They stepped into a massive cavern. And froze. In the center of the chamber was the tree, twisted, massive, black as coal and alive. Its roots pulsed, snaking through the earth like veins. From its branches hung locks of hair. Ribbons. Pieces of dresses. 12 of them. Catherine gasped. Each belonged to one of the daughters. Under the tree was a pool of blood, shimmering, thick and still. Floating in the blood were tiny white teeth. The tree groaned. And the roots lifted. They formed the face of the smoke man, only now his form was made of bark and flesh. He spoke with 100 voices. "You fed me. You raised me. You buried me. Now I will bloom." The cavern shook. The tree split open. And inside the hollow trunk they saw Ruth, floating, alive. Eyes closed. Arms out. But her skin had turned bark-like. Her hair was roots. Her body merged with the tree. Thomas stepped forward. "No," whispered Catherine. "She's part of it now." The tree pulsed again. And now they could see the others. All 11 girls. Trapped inside the tree. Still somehow alive. Suddenly a voice called out. "Burn it." It came from behind. It was Ruth. But not the one inside the tree. Another version. A ghost. "You have to burn it from above. The roots reach the house. Fire above will carry through. But it must be done by blood." "Whose blood?" Thomas cried. The ghost Ruth looked at Catherine. You are not an Ellison by birth. But the house marked you. Your body, your soul, is now part of its payment. Thomas grabbed Catherine's hand. No. There must be another way. But the tree roared. The chamber began to collapse. They ran. Back inside the house the floor cracked. Smoke hissed through the boards. The mirrors all shattered at once. Outside the ground trembled. The roots were rising. They had no more time. Catherine turned to Thomas. You have to light it. What? Set the house on fire. From here. Where it all started. No. I'm already part of it, she said calmly. But if I give it my life, it might finally rest. Thomas grabbed her shoulders. There has to be another way. Catherine kissed him softly. There isn't. She stepped into the center of the house. The boards blackened under her feet. The roots lifted, wrapping around her legs. She lit the lantern, looked back, and smiled. Tell our daughters I found them. Then, fire. The flames roared. Smoke poured through the windows. The Ellison house burned, for the first and final time. The sky turned black. Then red. Then, silence. Days later, townsfolk found Thomas sitting in the ashes. The tree was gone. The roots turned to dust. And the bones? Now laid in neat rows, each marked with a name as if finally ready to rest. No more whispers. No more vanishing girls. Just scorched earth. And a field that finally slept. Some say the Ellison land still groans beneath the soil. That on cold nights you can hear the wind call out the names of the missing girls, one by one. The house may be gone. But what it held, what it fed, still lingers in stories. In shadows. In blood. This was behind the genius. Where forgotten history hides in plain sight. And the things science won't explain. We dig up anyway. If you made it this far, subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who dares to listen after midnight. And remember, some mysteries are buried for a reason. Sleep tight.